everyone, my name is Melissa Frey, author of The Secret of the Codex, which released on Amazon last year, and The Prophecy of the Codex, which is scheduled to release next year. Fingers crossed. Today we're going to be talking about my top 10 tips for pantsing a series. So if you're not familiar with the term, pantsing is basically writing by the seat of your pants. In other words, you really have no outline or plot to speak of, which completely describes me. And as you can guess by the titles of my books, The Secret of the Codex and The Prophecy of the Codex, I am writing a series. Like I said, I completely pants my novels. I don't have a plot, which is kind of the other side of the spectrum, plotters. I write whatever comes out in the first draft, and then I edit a lot. Pantsing requires a lot of editing generally, so that's kind of where the bulk of my time is spent. But I just love the process. I'm in love with just finding out what happens, walking the characters through things and seeing what comes out. So it's just something that works for me. If pantsing is in your blood and you can't plot to save your life, just like me, I just want to give you a little hope that you can write a series. It can work out. There's just a few little tips that'll help you along the journey so that you don't get completely lost out in left field by the third book. All right, so here we go. My top 10 tips for pantsing a series. Number 1, know your characters. I'm a huge advocate of this, no matter if you're a plotter or a pantser or a plantser, somewhere in between. Anyone who writes a book needs to know their characters so well that you can walk them through things. You know how they talk, you know what they like, you know what they don't like, you know their personalities, you know how they interact with other different personalities. Now, you might not be able to quantify it as well, but you still have a good concept of who they are. And I'm not just talking about your main character. I'm not just talking about your main character and the love interest. I'm talking about every single character that there is. Now, generally, I know you're going to flesh out your main characters more and hopefully your antagonists a little bit more too. But your side characters aren't going to get as much love, but they still should have a pretty clear understanding in your head of what's going on and who they really are. If you don't, you're kind of in a dangerous zone where you could write very flat characters, and you don't want that. Number 2 is really know story. Okay, this is what I mean by this. You really need to know how story itself works because you need to know how to make it work for you. I actually get a lot of my storytelling from movies, TV shows, books too, for sure. And I actually enjoy movies that tell a story without actually ever saying a word, without actually having any dialogue. You know, when you're in a film and they pan in and you see like a dirty teddy bear on the ground, and that's really all you see and no context, but you can make assumptions from that. So I seek out TV and movies that portray story really well, whether it's storytelling through film or through dialogue or just the way that all of the things come together, when to bring in characters and what plot points actually work and what actually kind of fall flat, what actually makes up a good story. If you'd like to learn about it, there's tons and tons of resources on the internet and books that you can read to learn about how a story works. Number 3 is add in layered antagonists, basically the bad guys in your story. You really want to give them their own set of motivations, their own set of goals and likes and dislikes. You want to create a depth for that character. One of my favorite ways to write antagonists is to create a likable antagonist, which in my opinion is one of the best ways to write them because you really want the reader to be so immersed in your story and in all of your characters, every single one, then they keep reading because they have to find out what happens. The other benefit of creating a likable antagonist, or at least one that has a lot of motivations and you get to dig deep into why they are the way they are or what their reasonings are, you can actually have them switch sides. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but if you have kind of a group of antagonists, you can actually maybe have one person that comes out and they actually start helping the heroes, or which is actually what I kind of did in my first book, Or you can have just even a main antagonist. Maybe they'll come back in a later book and they actually have switched sides. So if you create emotions and characters and you really get to know those antagonists as well, you can have them switch sides and it will be believable. And then that just leaves room for another antagonist to come up. And then you've got all these layers where the MCs actually are having to work with the antagonist, and maybe they're conflicted about that because they tried to kill him or something. But it creates a lot of depth in your story. Number 4 is something I've already kind of alluded to, but it's basically to have every single character in your book that is going to be in the series, ongoing in the series, have their own set of motivations, their own set of personalities and conflict and internal dialogue. You want each character to have their own character arc. When you write a series, each character has to grow in that first book, but then they also have to grow in the second book and they have to grow in the third book. And that can become a little tricky, but if you don't have that growth, you have that two-dimensional character again that nobody really connects with and they don't really see the story moving forward. The whole point of the story is so that there's character growth. So if you create that likable antagonist that does show character growth, and maybe character growth is switching sides, or at least maybe they kind of undermine what the other antagonists are doing, it really helps create a more richer experience for the reader. Number 5, bring in new characters in phases. So basically, you don't want to info dump all of your characters all at once. You don't want them all in the first book. And bonus, if you're a pantser, they probably won't all be in the first book anyway, because as you're writing the first book, you wouldn't have thought of them yet. And it's organic. It comes in naturally, all the different layers and adding the people in as you're going, making sure it makes sense with the plot and the character growth and everything like that. And you can bring in characters that become important to the story, vital even to the story. I haven't released my second book yet, so I won't give away any kind of spoilers or anything, but in my second book, I do introduce a character that becomes integral to the entire story. Very important. And it was actually when I wrote my first book, it was someone I hadn't even thought about yet. When I wrote the first book, I kind of thought it would probably be a series, but I didn't really have anything in mind of where the series would go. Like I said, I'm a pantser, so that makes sense. So I just kind of wrote what came out, and then when I wrote the second book, I said, now I need some new characters. I need a few people to move this plot along, and so I brought in this character, and it's been a wonderful experience. They are an amazing person, and they might be one of my most favorite characters I've written, to the point where I'm actually having trouble giving them bad qualities because I like them so much. So that's kind of what I'm going through with editing it right now, because I am in the process of editing. So I'm trying to figure out what the downsides of that person is. So that'll be fun. Number 6 is creating a multi-tiered plot. For example, in my series, I call it the CODEX series, there's a discovery that they make at the end of the first book that impacts what the rest of the series is going to do. Now, I don't want to explain what happens because I don't want to give it away in case you do want to read it, which I would love. Thank you. So the thing that happens at the end changes kind of everything that's going on, and it changes the characters' lives and the antagonists and all of that. So you can imagine if there's such a big shift, but it's at the end of the book, then we can explore that shift further when we go into the second book. So in the first book, there's a group of my main characters, that actually 4 of them, which actually allow me to play off their different personalities and the conflict between them. And they're actually 2 couples, which kind of just, it brings in that romance factor. So that's really sweet and fun to write, but also all the conflict that happens with that. Creating a multi-tiered plot helps move you through a series without actually knowing where you're actually going. It's basically just giving yourself options. Number 7, don't shy away from big casts. Now, I've talked about this. I talked about this in the previous point. I have 4 main characters that come into play, and they're kind of throughout the whole series. I've got a huge cast to pull from in the antagonists, almost indefinite because it's an army that's like an undefined size. So I could pull in as many characters as I wanted. I've got the leader, I've got the 5 elders, I've got the second in command for the leader. So there's a lot of people to pull from. And if you have the multiple main characters now, I don't necessarily say that you have to do this to pants a series, but I found it helpful to have those 4 characters, because I'm finding out that actually in the first book, I almost kind of wrote it from one of the characters' perspective. Almost felt like, even though I was writing those different points of view, the book itself felt like Kayla's story, for lack of a better term, my main character. And although there were other subplots going on and other characters, and they grew and developed, and it still felt like it was Kayla's story. I'm finding out that in the second book, it's almost like it's Grady's story, which is my second main character, Grady, Kayla's love interest. Some significant things happen, and I'm able to tell the story, even though I'm using everyone's point of view again. And actually in the execution of it, I actually feel like the events happening and the things that happen are really from Grady's point of view. So it helps to have multiple main characters, so you can actually explore all of those differently. Again, as a pantser, it might not be intentional. I certainly wasn't intentional that it turned out to be Grady's story in the second book, and who knows whose story it'll be in the third, but it just creates that possibility. So really, when we're pantsing a book, we're creating possibilities so that we can pull them out and hone them and get them really perfected, I guess, for lack of a better word, so that you can move through the series successfully. Number 8 is throw in Easter eggs that you can spread throughout the series, subtly of course. In my first book, I created the concept of the lightning necklace. Now, when I wrote that in first, I wrote it, it's actually in like the opening scene, like the very first couple of pages, and I didn't know why, and I didn't know what it was, and it actually in the first draft never came back again. And I was like, but wait a minute, this could be something that's really cool and I could develop that. So what I did in the editing process, of course, the editing process is where you can refine this stuff and make it pretty. I was able to actually bring that back in 2 more times in that book. And then actually in the second book, I was able to bring it in again, and it actually has more meaning. I was having this discussion with an author friend the other day about author Easter eggs. So that's what I call them, when it's like something that just is so silly that happened and you put it in your book just as a reminder to yourself of like, oh, that's what I was doing when I wrote this. It's just hilarious. I think there was something I put in my first draft of my first book, and then I ended up editing out because it didn't quite fit, but it was still a fun little thing for me to remember. So it's kind of that, but this is something that you can actually, whether it's a symbol or a physical manifestation of something like my necklace, or really anything, just something that you can kind of subtly weave through the threads of the story and through each book, just to kind of give it a connection and kind of bring all the series together. Number 9, take copious notes. I guess the way I do this is using the find and replace in the find function, the search function within either Word or Pages, or I think Google Docs has it as well. Whatever program you're using, I'm sure Scrivener has the same thing. You basically use the find and you can search for certain things. When I wrote my first book, I wrote it in Word, but when I started writing my second book, or once I got a little bit into it, I actually bought a Mac, and so I was able to write in Pages. One feature that I love of Pages, their bookmark feature, because what I can do is I can go through and I can just highlight something, and I think it's similar to like comments in Word, but to me it's not as obtrusive because you can see the comments glaringly obvious in the text. But in Pages, you highlight a certain text and you create a bookmark for it, and then it's just creates you a list on the side. And so I have like this little coding system where I write like an FS for foreshadowing, and so I know that like, okay, this is foreshadowing something, I need to go back and make sure that I actually play that out, so it's not just some useless foreshadowing type thing. So you can leave yourself notes, you can say, oh yeah, I don't know what this is, so check this later. So it really helps to kind of get your thoughts in order. So however you want to take notes, however you want to as you're doing it, it's kind of like outlining as you're writing. So you're like, oh yeah, I just added in this person, they may be significant, here's their name and information, that kind of thing. And number 10, read your previous books and refer to them often. Yeah, kind of like the note taking, but I actually went through and reread my first book, and it was really fun because I had a hard copy of it, and so I was able to read through the hard copy, and it felt, very exciting for an author to read their own book like that. But going back and rereading it helped me really bring in the different things that I wanted to remember, and the things that I didn't want to make inconsistent. So I caught one thing that I read the book and I was like, oh, well, that's how that happened. So now what I just wrote in the second book isn't going to make sense anymore. So I had to rewrite it. So it's really helpful. Make sure you know that book like the back of your hand. Yes, you wrote it, but you probably won't remember all the little nuances. So go back and read it, refer to it. Really make sure that your second book is following the continuity, because that'll confuse the reader. We don't want that. All right, so those are my 10 tips, but I do have 3 little bonus tips, thoughts, insights to help you through this process. So let's do these quickly. Number 1 is add in a lot of drama. Yes, stories need conflict. It's kind of a basics, but the more drama you add, the more tension it'll create, the more you can get your characters moving through the story and really move the story along. Lots of drama is good in this case. Number 2 is use music for inspiration. Now, not everybody can listen to music while they write, and that's fine. I happen to. So I have certain albums that I listen through the whole time. I create a playlist so that I can choose the music that really fits the tone of my book. And I actually discovered a character. I was able to discover their background and their backstory from a song that fit them. So it was actually not the other way around, because most of the time, I guess, you create the plot and you've got all the story and you go and then you find a song that fits that moment that really perfectly describes it. And that's great when that happens, and I have tons of songs like that. But in this case, I was trying to figure out how this character, why they actually became the way they did. And when I heard the song, I said, this feels like this character. But wait a minute, this song is talking about this. And then like the light bulb went on and everything just kind of fell into place, and I knew why that character acted the way they did. So it's kind of a fun thing to do. Use that music if you can, because it'll kind of help you think about things a little bit differently and see it a little bit differently, and actually maybe be able to work with it a little bit more. Which leads me to my 3rd point, is to trust your gut. If something feels right, you'll know it. If something feels wrong, you will know it. So if something feels wrong and you're going in a direction that doesn't just quite feel right, and it's hard to get those words down and you don't understand, stop, take a breath, step back from it, maybe back up a little bit in the manuscript and find the place that feels right and move forward. When you're pantsing, it's really hard to know, oh yes, this will fit perfectly. But if you're following your gut and what feels right, it'll just fall into place. And I can't tell you how many times I have been writing and I will like jump up, or I'll be dancing in my chair, or I'll run out into the living room and jump up and down to tell my husband that I just figured something out. It's an amazing feeling. It's an incredible feeling that I think is unique to writers, certainly, but I think pantsers sometimes experience it maybe a little bit differently. And maybe not. I could be wrong. Let me know if I am. But it's part of the process, and it's a really satisfying part of the process. So if you can really develop that kind of sixth sense of what actually is going right and how it's going right and what you want the story to say and how you want it to go and how the characters are going to evolve, really hone that so that you can ultimately tell, no, this is not going to work, or yes, this is going to work. This is exactly what I needed. Jump up and down, leave it in the book, develop it, and make it the best it can possibly be. So that's it. Those are my 10 tips, well, like 13, 10 and 3 bonus tips for pantsing a series. And I hope you learned something. If you're a plotter, maybe you've gotten a little bit more into my head and how my process works. If you're a pantser, hopefully it's given you some encouragement that you can write a series. It is possible. You don't have to have every last thing plotted out and scheduled to make it work. Again, I am Melissa Frey. My book, The Secret of the Codex, is available on Amazon. Prophecy of the Codex, again, will be coming out next year. That's the plan. And so I'd really appreciate it if you check it out. I'm also a book editor and lover of stories and a grammar nerd, which is why I love editing so much. So I am so thankful you guys have watched. I would appreciate if you give me a thumbs up and subscribe at the big red button below. Ring that bell to get alerts. It'd be amazing. I love you guys so much. I am so glad you're watching. Please let me know what you think below. I would love to hear from you. All right, so I guess that wraps it up for now. Bye.